Good afternoon, everyone. This is Drishti Pant from People Matters. A very warm welcome to all of you joining us today. We are excited for this discussion in partnership with Wilson Learning. We'll be talking about developing impactful learning, what your L&D strategy needs. Learning and development has always played a fundamental role in ensuring the growth of your workforce as the business carries on. But the results haven't been as impactful as companies expect them to be. This is largely because the models end with training. In this context and with the session today, we will look forward to empowering organizations in their journey to grow their workforce with the best plan of action. And to help us with the insights, we have an amazing panel of speakers joining us today. So let's welcome them to the screen. Today we have with us Joyita Mukherjee, Senior Manager, Learning and Development at Moglix. Joyita has played an instrumental role in establishing L&D function from the scratch in different companies, both large and small. In fact, she has led multiple learning initiatives with growing startups like Innovator and Moglix. She has also helped people achieve their professional and career development goals by designing and developing relevant and exciting learning solutions. It's so great to have you, Joyita. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Drishti.
Joining Joyita is Anand Subramaniam, Senior Director, Consulting and Capability Development APAC at Wilson Learning. Anand has extensive facilitation experience working with clients in diverse industries like manufacturing, finance, software development, pharmaceuticals, IT, agriculture, and banking. He has developed and delivered programs in the areas of leadership effectiveness, personal effectiveness, among many other areas. In fact, he has delivered these programs to a wide range of audiences, from frontline supervisors, individual contributors, to business heads and C-suite executives. Welcome, Anand. It's so great to have you here with us.
Thank you, Drishti. Good to be here.
All right, I'm really looking forward to our conversation because the topic is very interesting and very, very timely, because we've been talking about L&D so much, but the impact and the measuring the impact, that remains a concern for many companies. But before we jump to the discussion, I would like to remind our audience that if you have any questions during the session, please feel free to use the chat window. Keep sharing your questions and we'll try to take as many as possible during the session. All right, so with that, I think let's begin our discussion. And to kickstart this discussion, I think it's important that we first address the challenges, the issues, the pain points. And Joyita, I would love to hear from you. And if you could help us throw some light on the urgent L&D challenges that organizations are facing.
Thanks, Drishti, for the question, and welcome everyone. The biggest challenge, I would say, at this point of time in our industry would be the digital transformation and change management. We have recently launched a learning platform in our organization, and we also realized that how our audience in this industry really love the human touch. An in-person, session or an in-person touch, somebody really telling them that how, a certain thing needs to be done, or what are the best practices, how you can go back and apply that at work. Now, the pandemic hit and we all had to go virtual. So that was, again, a big challenge where really, pivoting from, let's say, an in-person session to right away into a virtual mode where everybody are joining. Each person is joining from different parts of the country, and we are doing different programs, sessions, connects. So that was a big challenge, but we have come a long way. We have done multiple strategies to bring that up. But at this point of time, like I said, we have recently launched a LMS for the first time, being a startup and being an organization which is into supply chain technology and which is scaling up, right? It was something which was very new to the audience, right? So we saw a lot of adoption challenges in the beginning, wherein people would still like to kind of communicate in other modes versus, let's say, an email or a in-person connect versus going to the platform and really, communicating to various, features that's already there in the platform. We also realized that while the platform brought a lot of opportunities in terms of self-paced learning, online learning, where people can learn themselves, but still the adoption initially was a big challenge. And the way that we have brought that up, and right now we have come again a long way, and we see a great adoption at this point of time. We devised an adoption plan, really, in terms of doing some incentivization, some gamification, telling the value of the platform to people, how it can save their time, how they can really learn a lot of things at one go. It's on their own pace. So bringing that value really helped the audience to really come into the platform and really learn. But at the same time, we have not lost the human touch. We do a lot of programs where we keep the blended approach, where we keep the in-person touch plus some reinforcement with online courses. So that's one. The other one I would say would be being a very fast-paced and agile organization. There are a lot of dynamics involved. There are a lot of changes which happen. So let's say we are doing a program, a 3 months program journey, where there would be leaders who would be highly invested upon this specific journey. But there is a possibility by the end of the journey, there could be organizational changes, there could be movements, there could be ownership changes, right? Because of which, essentially, at times you would have seen the leadership, ownership, kind of, it's not the same as it was perhaps in the beginning, right? Because of the priorities change, because of a lot of things. So in an organization like this, that's one of the biggest challenge. How do you kind of sustain the manager and the leader ownership in driving those learning outcomes throughout the program journey? So I would say these are the two big challenges which is hitting our industry at this point of time.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Joyita. Anand, would you like to add anything to this? Because I know you've also worked with several companies in these last 2 years, especially when Joyita highlighted that the entire transition from completely in-person learning to virtual learning. So getting that adoption and right was a big problem.
I would broadly agree with that. And this has been a challenge. It sort of got more highlighted as a challenge in the last couple of years after the pandemic, because so many more people had to start moving on to more digital platforms, more virtual modes of learning and training and things like that. So it became something that a lot more people became aware of, more front and center in the last 2 years. It has existed, though, as a challenge for even longer than that. I'm sure Joyita would have seen this in previous organizations as well. I'm sure you've seen this in other organizations too. There has existed for a lot of time a lot of digitally enabled learning solutions, for example e-learning solutions or self-paced learning solutions that have been available. But a lot of the time what organizations have found is there's a difference between giving people access to the solution and then actually making sure that the solution gets consumed and used. And often that last mile has been a challenge that people have encountered even before the pandemic started. And that just sort of became more visible during these last 2.5 years. So broadly, I would agree with Joyita that that is a challenge that has become more and more sharply in relief. Where I would also say there has been a continuing challenge that people have become more acutely aware of, I think, is an older but probably more long lasting challenge, which in my experience goes back to how do you make a learning program actually something that has tangible business results? And while this has always been a challenge, this has again become a situation where there is more pressure on learning teams, learning executives, learning partners, because after the pandemic, a lot of organizations have experienced certain things with learning where, to borrow a phrase, you can't really put the genie back in the bottle. So a lot of organizations, for example, were very hesitant to adopt things like virtual learning sessions and things like that. And the pandemic sort of forced their hand. You had to do it. You didn't have a choice when people couldn't go into work. Once they've adopted it, a lot of organizations have experienced certain benefits that it is very difficult for a business to give away. So, for example, understanding that there are logistical advantages, sometimes cost advantages, there are scale advantages to doing things virtually, often means that organizations now can't really step away from it. But then the question becomes, how do you now start to look at this also more strategically? rather than just look at it as a more cost-effective, scale-effective, transactional way of looking at learning and development. That's something that we've seen has become or has gotten renewed focus in terms of organizational challenges to deal with. So that's really my 2 cents that I would add to what Joyita has already shared with us.
Yeah, thank you for highlighting the lag. That after the training ends, are the learners able to apply the learning? How are we recognizing and measuring that impact that learning has had? So, Joyita, do you have any insight on maybe something that has worked for your organization in overcoming this lag that we were just discussing?
Yeah, absolutely. We have, done a lot of things to bring impact and effectiveness to the programs that we are running. Of course, there is no end to kind of, one can always evolve with a lot of strategies, but we have done some incremental ways and means to kind of, bring that impact, and so that people can go back and apply that at work. I think one of the things that we always do is make sure there is always an understanding of the skill gap and the challenges before we design a program, right? Because that's very important. It's not about just one-off session. It's about an entire journey that we design, wherein the sessions are planned, they are staggered, they are planned in certain way so that you have time for people to learn a skill and then go back and apply that. So that has been the strategy that we have essentially adopted for all our programs, whether it's internal or external. We do a lot of, pre and post. Of course, those are, to assess the needle movement and the change and the impact, which is, which is being reflected. We also do a lot of, diagnostics, dipstick study, and FGDs to assess the key challenges. And then after 30 or 45 days, we do something called a reflection session for all the sessions that we do, wherein participants or the learners would come back and they would create like a 1 or a 2-pager document talking about what are the action points that they learned, which they went back to their respective roles and they applied that, and how, right? So we have done 2 programs like that. One was on presentation, which was an internal program where we had asked people to kind of create a presentation before the workshop happened. And then after we concluded the program, we actually asked them to create a presentation. And then it was like a teach back where we tell them that, okay, these were some of the changes, these were some of the improvements, which gets reflected versus what you had shown earlier. I would also like to call out a negotiation skills program, which we did through Wilson Learning, and it's called Getting to Yes, which was a very, very powerful program, and it was staggered over 5 weeks. And we did it for 2 batches, and so I could give one example wherein, it was specifically for a team called Supply Team, where we gathered the supplier inputs before the program to make it and to customize it and tailor-made it during the program, that okay, these are the concepts and the frameworks. How can you apply this when you go back to your suppliers and negotiate, those things? And then after 30 or 45 days, we asked them that what are some of the ways that they negotiated? What did they do back at work, right? And also address their questions. So this was a very powerful way to kind of, really understand how they've applied the learnings and what they're really doing about it. And then, of course, Wilson Learning does give you, an impact assessment report, which clearly shows the needle movement and the impact of that program. So I think that is one program which has been very helpful. The other program I want to talk about is, we did it again, an external program, which was on managing your priorities when you're getting multiple, when you're getting into multiple projects from different clients, right? And there we did a session as a part of the program journey, which was on managing, making your managers as coaches, right? So basically telling your managers that how do you create an ecosystem to have those everyday conversations with your teams so that your teams can really know that my manager is invested upon and I need to apply these skills, what I've learned. Right. So that was a session around that. So again, it was very powerful. So I think we do all of these and we make sure all our sessions are very, very, it has an impact. It's not finishing at the training. like you had earlier said when we started this. So yeah, that's.
Thank you for sharing those use cases. And I think something that stood out for me is, the impact assessment that you were talking about, and that brings me to my next question. And around how do you think there's some value in measuring that impact and that performance improvement, and how can organizations successfully and accurately capture this? Because if you can highlight more about this impact assessment form, share more about it, and other ways in which you are maybe measuring the performance improvement.
Right. I would also like to talk about another program that we had done, and which was called the mentoring program, where we had taken inputs from our mentees, and this was specifically for a team, where we wanted to kind of build mentors in the team, right? So we had taken inputs from their mentees in terms of what is the kind of mentors that they would like to look forward to, right? And there we got a lot of inputs from there. And then we did it was again an external program that we did. And we got a lot of inputs, a lot of good insights. And then after 45 days, we did a reflection session on that, and again took a survey from these mentees asking them that what has changed, right? Have you seen some improvement, some change, the way the mentors kind of manage you, they communicate with you? So a couple of themes that we identified based on which we asked the same question. And it was amazing to see some great insights and a lot of change which happened. So this was again a very powerful program that we did. And coming back to the Getting to Yes program, impact assessment, like I was saying, was again very, very useful. It really called out that what is the needle movement and what are the change, that we have seen in those specific people, how they have gone back and really negotiated with those people where they were facing challenges, right? Through a survey, we take a survey where the managers have to basically share their inputs, how they have kind of applied that back at work, and then there is an assessment which is called out. So again, a very, very useful tool which really helped us to measure the impact very well.
All right. Thank you for sharing that, Alan. I would like to hear your insights as well on, what are some other ways on capturing these performance insights, whether in terms of feed forward or feedback, to really measure the real change that learning is making.
Sure. And I was fortunate enough to be the facilitator that actually worked with Joyita's group on that negotiation skills workshop that she was talking about. And that was the start of our association together in terms of working on specific learning programs as partners. So a lot of what she was saying, it started to bring back memories. And there's a lot of mechanisms that we use in order to measure what is typically, I think, called needle movement, right? So that tends to be the buzzword that a lot of people talk about. How do we see needle movement in terms of participant skills or participant results in terms of before a workshop and after a workshop? The point that I'd like to make here is can seem like a small one and a nitpicky one, but we often find that it makes a big difference in terms of understanding the difference between measuring the impact of a learning program or a learning intervention and actually measuring a person's performance, right? And I'll give you an example of what I mean by this. The same negotiation skills workshop that we're talking about, right? Let me give you an example. Let's say that we did not do any training. Let's say we didn't do a training program at all. But let's say that the CEO of Joyita's organization made a point of going to that entire supplier team once a week and personally telling each of those people, I'm going to keep an eye on how you are negotiating. All of your negotiations are going to be recorded, and I'm going to be evaluating those recordings personally. And that is going to decide on your bonuses, and that is going to decide on your incentive structure. Now, I can almost guarantee you that even without doing a training program, if you simply measured the needle movement of those people's negotiation performance before they got that message and say about a month after they got that message, I can almost guarantee you that you will see needle movement, right? And this is not because of a training program. It's simply because of a message that came to them from their CEO and repeatedly kept coming to them from their CEO. And the reason I bring up this example is because there's a difference between measuring a person's performance and the actual impact of a workshop on creating that performance. Because ultimately, what can contribute to a person's performance is a number of different things, not necessarily just a workshop, right? And I'm sure as learning professionals, we've all seen this. A workshop or making a person sit through a workshop is one thing that can increase their performance, but it isn't the sole contributor to that needle movement. So if I sit through a negotiation skills workshop and then 1 month after I sit through it, if I'm measured in terms of my performance, and if my performance shows a certain increase, it isn't always directly attributable only to that workshop. There could be other things in my environment that are contributing to it. So what we found as an organization, as Wilson Learning, is important for us to do, which is what we've been trying to work with Joyita and Moglix as well, is how do you start to now isolate what you can attribute to the workshop itself? So if I'm saying, all right, there are multiple things in my environment that could result in increased performance for me, how much of that performance do I believe is because of skills, concepts, techniques that I have learned in a workshop? Am I able to try and separate that out a little bit? That separation becomes important when it comes to measuring the performance of the program rather than just the overall needle movement. And this is where in Wilson Learning, we use a specific survey-based impact evaluation mechanism where we get participants to give us a fairly conservative estimate. So if there is a particular opportunity, say, that I'm evaluating, if I'm negotiating from the supply team, in that particular opportunity, what were the results that I got? And what percentage of those results would I attribute to specific skills, concepts, techniques that I may have learned in this negotiation skills workshop? You've got to get that specific with it in terms of the way you're asking that question so that we don't misattribute performance to the workshop or the learning program almost entirely. So I find that that really is where we've been able to help organizations to really dial in on which of those skills are things that seem to be making the biggest difference. And being able to separate those two things out, I think, gives you a greater sense of what's really producing your performance, and therefore where do you need to be putting that extra focus as you move forward. So that's how I feel like at Wilson Learning we've been able to help clients like Joyita and her organization evaluate program performance without conflating it too much with just overall performance improvement, if that makes sense.
It totally makes sense. And I think thank you for highlighting the difference between measuring the performance and really measuring the impact of a learning initiative, because there are so many other elements that could influence a change in performance as well. I think that makes me think, and I feel like we should take a step back and really reflect on we've been talking about the challenges that various organizations are facing in terms of the L&D strategies, delivery and design. But maybe there's some issues at the very foundation, at the very core of it. So what do you think, Anand, are some critical elements that continue to be missing in the current L&D models?
So that's an interesting question. Because there are the key word for me is continue, right? So there are always, we know, you're never able to put together a perfect L&D model or a perfect L&D implementation. Such a thing does not exist because we don't live in a perfect environment. There's always certain things that we would love to do, but we can't do because of logistical issues or bandwidth issues or other ground realities, right? But it's also interesting for us to see what are some things that have continued to be issues over extended periods of time, because often they don't talk so much to circumstances or situations, they talk more to mindsets. So to help with this, I believe there was a poll that we shared with you, which was a poll with 4 options. Would it be possible to open that poll to the participants so that we can get a sense of what participants are thinking in response to that question, and we can maybe build from there? So I
Sure.
believe the poll
Yes.
question was actions contributing the most towards successful uh, learning, transfer, and
Transfer.
application on the job.
Yeah. I'll request my team to share the code, Menti code, on the chat. I request everyone to go to www.menti.com and use the code 58304236. You can see the code on the screen as well, I believe. Yes, there it is. And the question is, in your opinion, which of these actions contributes the most towards successful learning transfer and application on the job? Is it strong instructional design, creating a learning culture, manager coaching, or connecting learning to the job? I think
So
as we
let's give them,
wait, yeah,
let's give them a few seconds to answer
yes,
this. And I think there's an audience question that's come up, which we might
correct.
address as we wait. Yeah.
Yes, I think we were discussing, we've already discussed a bit about this, but maybe if you can share some more practices that leaders can implement after the training to measure learner performance, and uh, to ensure that it is only reflecting the impact of the training and not the other elements.
Sure. And I would also love to hear from Joyita's perspective as well, in terms of on the ground, what are some things that her
Yes,
organization is doing right now as we speak. Broadly, from my perspective, practices we can implement after training to measure learner performance are not any different from any of the other performance measures we use anyway, right? And this is something that most organizations are very good at. We're very good at putting performance measures in place, because this is really how we measure whether or not an employee is pulling their weight in our organization. The key is, are we able to link the learning workshop to which of those performance measures should be impacted? Right? So, whichever way you are normally measuring their performance on multiple different areas and multiple different metrics, can you be very clear about which of those metrics are supposed to be affected by a workshop? And you simply keep a track of those metrics to measure performance. So, that typically tends to be the way all performance is measured before and after a workshop is concerned. Where I would add a little bit of a wrinkle, maybe, or maybe an added dimension to this is, while we measure performance, I would also encourage not just learning professionals, but also business leaders who might be listening into this to also consider measuring something that we call fulfillment levels. And what I mean by this is, just because a person is performing well when it comes to their numbers and their targets does not necessarily mean that they are happy. And that's a simplified way of understanding fulfillment. So, for example, if I have been set certain targets, I may be actually meeting and exceeding those targets and doing really well in terms of my numbers. And so my performance measures may lead you to think, as my leader or as my boss, I seem to be doing really well. But if in order to produce those numbers, I'm starting to put in more and more work and I'm starting to burn out as an individual, well, I may be miserable while performing, while producing those numbers. So it's important to start thinking about that a little bit as well. So those raw performance numbers don't always indicate the levels of satisfaction and engagement that people have. And it's important to try and work some of those measures into this as well. With that said, I'd like to toss this over to Joyita, because as someone who's actually
yeah.
actively doing this in her own organization, I'm sure, Joyita, there'd be insights that you can share that's very relevant to this.
Sure, sure. Great. But I really like the insight, Anand, which you gave. I think it's not just about if a person is performing great, it doesn't mean that the person is really happy. So yeah, absolutely agree to that. And in fact, we are right now doing a programs for our leadership. It's called a High Performing Leaders Program, and I'm sure when we wrap that up, we'll have even more insights than what I can give you today. But on the onset, I just wanted to say that it's again going back to creating that environment and ecosystem for leaders to really uh, really implement or apply what they've learned, right? uh, One is you measure it and you link it to the performance, you link it to a metric. But the other one is also, am I getting those opportunities? Or probably I, as a leader, if I've learned something, am I identifying those opportunities in my day-to-day work, whether it's with my teams or with my my leaders, my CEO, my customers? Am I finding those opportunities to kind of really apply those skills what I've learned, right? So I think there is a self ownership. There is also an environment which is provided by the organization, and of course The third one I would say is the performance metric, right? Because if we just talk about performance metric, it may not give you a holistic picture. So I think that's what our philosophy is, and that's essentially with that we do all our leadership programs.
Yeah. And as I hear you say that, Joyita, I can see on the screen that even our audience thinks that, connecting learning to the job is one of the action that contributes the most towards successful learning transfer and application.
Mhm.
Although creating a learning culture is also giving good competition to connecting learning to the job, but I think we do have a clear winner. So,
Yeah,
what are your
and
thoughts on that?
this is really interesting, and this is why I wanted this poll up, right? Because if you remember, the question we were originally discussing was what
Yeah,
continues to be the challenge that faces
yeah,
people in
yeah,
terms of making learning actually transfer to the job. The four options that we put up here, I put them up quite deliberately. And just to give everybody who answered this poll some context, these four options actually come from a research paper that Wilson Learning put out, which talked about actual learning transfer. What are the different things that multiple organizations have done around the world that have actually experienced high levels of transfer of learning from the classroom into an actual work environment? For anybody who's interested in seeing the paper, I'm sure you will have contact information that you can use that will come to you at the end of this webinar, where we're happy to share the results of this learning transfer research with you. To cut a long story short, what that research showed us is that there are 11 different things that organizations have done, which taken together can actually increase transfer of learning and application to the job by up to 180% over the normal. And by normal, what I mean is if you just make a person attend a workshop, right? If you just make them do that, how much do they transfer to work? And if they do all of these 11 things that we identified, what was the increase in transfer? The increase was a 180% increase. Now, the reality is you can't do all 11 of those things. So the question is, which of those things seem to have the biggest impact in terms of increasing application of learning on the job? And out of those 11, I picked four in this poll that we asked everybody to answer. And it's always interesting for me to see the results, right? Because out of those four, they all contribute to learning transfer. But the one of the options which had the least number of votes for it is actually the option that has the highest amount of learning transfer that it creates when it comes to making a participant apply what they do on the in a learning program to the job when they go back. And that is very simply manager coaching. And my answer to your question, what continues to be a challenge as people implement learning workshops and try to transfer that learning to work, is exactly that: manager coaching. The principle here is very simple. All of us who are learning professionals, we know this. We can do everything that we can in order to get people to try and apply learning to work, right? But we all know the reality is beyond a point, it doesn't work. And it doesn't work because beyond a point, the way we are seen is as L&D. You are L&D. You are supposed to be somebody who provides training programs to me. Once that program is done, don't be telling me how I should do my real job. To do my real job, I will get input from my boss, because my boss or my manager is the one that does my performance appraisal. My manager is the one who decides how much I'm going to get as a bonus, what I'm going to be rated as. And therefore, what I will and will not apply to my work, I will do only if my manager is taking it seriously. This is the ground reality of all work and all skill, which is why the biggest thing that we find makes a difference is how much are we able to enroll managers of participants to actually coach participants actively after they attend a training workshop. This coaching by a manager passes certain messages without them having to actually say it. For example, it tells them, this is important. It is important enough for me as your manager to have taken the time to learn this skill, and therefore you should learn it as well. It is important enough for me to take time in our actual working environment to ask you about the skill. So you should be thinking about using it here as well. And I'm evaluating you in your performance based on your usage and application of the skill. And so it is in your interest to actually use this skill, Not because learning and development is telling you to do it, but because I, as your boss, am telling you that I will evaluate you on it, and I'm going to take the time and the trouble to coach you on it. This, all the research shows that manager coaching and involvement can have anything, can create anything from a 30% to a 68% increase in actual transfer of learning from the classroom to the job. And this is the one place, and I know Joyita and I have had long conversations about this in terms of creating it and harnessing it as best as possible. In my experience, I find that this is the place where normally learning transfer initiatives break down. And they break down here because learning and development executives are very often hesitant to push business and business leaders to actually do this. Where the blunt message, even if you don't say it in these words, has to be, if you're not willing to spend time coaching people to use the skill, don't bother teaching them the skill, because they will learn it, they will forget it, and there is no point in having spent that money. You would have just given them a 1 day or a 2 day vacation to attend the workshop, remember the facilitator, but nothing about the skills. So getting this manager involvement, I find, continues to be the hardest challenge. And whenever we've been able to work with clients to actually help them do this, we found that's when learning implementations have actually shown maximum amount of transfer and application to work. So I'd say that's the biggest continuing issue for me.
Thank you. Thank you for highlighting that. And thank you for sharing those insights from the research and your experience. Joyita, you were also talking about, creating that ecosystem of learning where there's constant support. And they're not just managers, but there are other stakeholders in the ecosystem also that can support each other in applying learning on the job. So can you share something about peer learning and how that can help in applying learning to the job?
Peer learning has today become like the most, the popular thing, the key thing, which everybody is looking forward to. I think social learning, peer learning is something which is, and why not? Like these are two things which is the most effective way to learn, and very easy also to learn. You do not have to kind of get into sessions, organize events, and all of that. It's just about the peers that you have who are working together. You're learning from each other, right? And research shows that peer learning and learning in a shared way, where you're sharing stories, examples, your success stories, your failure stories, how you have done a certain piece of thing, really improves engagement, really improves your productivity, because you're really learning from a person who's actually gone through that, right? So we do a lot in Moglix, peer learning. We encourage a lot. We have certain mediums. We have hangouts which we use very, very effectively for all our programs. We create a hangouts group, and that's essentially the medium where we communicate, where we promote, where we do all the branding. We do a lot of gamification. We do leaderboard scorecarding through that, and also appreciation at the end. So let's say we do a program where there was a activity that we did, and a team performed really well. So really recognizing them through those platforms, and of course sharing a lot of resources and experiences from each other. So we have a lot of people who share their own experiences in terms of a specific skill that they are learning. Apart from that, the platform that we have recently launched, we are also leveraging that as a great forum for peer learning. We have created specific teams and groups where people can come and collaborate. They can learn from each other. They can share, reads, articles, videos if they've seen to a specific skill. And they can share with each other. They get some points. So we have also gamified it. So yeah, we are seeing a lot of adoption in this area, and this is very effective, and we see a lot of high engagement. So you don't really have to push people to kind of do this, right? People just enjoy it, because it's like you're really knowing this person, and this is part of your work routine. You're just getting into it and you're just learning. So I think this is a very powerful mode, and we use a lot in our organization.
Thank you for sharing that. And we are getting one audience question, and I think that really relates to what you shared in the beginning as well. That you work in a company in a fast-growing organization, where things are very dynamic, right? So, how do you implement the learner transfer model at scale in this particular case?
Yeah, very pertinent question. And yeah, in a couple of my responses, I shared that uh, it's actually a big challenge, right? If you're doing, let's say, a longish program journey sort of a thing, where you want a manager and the leader to be highly invested upon, there is a possibility that by the end of the program, things might get changed. Like there could be dynamism involved, and people exit. There are employee movements, there are organization structure movements. So what we do, we essentially make sure that we have uh, not just one person who's invested upon it. Of course, there's one leader, business leader, but we keep we have a concept of learning champions, right, which we have internally in the organization, who are like those subject matter expert, come one spock from each business, who will be taking that ownership and responsible for whether it's content, whether it's program, whether it's impact. So we make sure that even if there are certain changes, these people are with us, and they really take that ownership from the business side to kind of drive that learning. Whether they're going back to, maybe there's a new manager who's joined in, they're going back to and really sharing that what has happened so far, what is the responsibility, what is that we're looking forward to in the next few months, all of that. So we work very closely with the business, and we don't work as a siloed L&D team to kind of drive this, so that even if there are movements and changes, we have representation from the business who really know that where are we on this program, and what is that is needs to be done from the business side. So I think that is very important, to really partner very collaboratively with the business, and that has really helped us in a lot of interventions.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And do you have any advice for this question on how to implement the learn and transfer model at scale?
That's a dangerous question to ask people like Joyita and I, because we'll never stop talking about it. Just to keep it limited, though, here's one thing that I would say. If there's something that I would ask all L&D practitioners to consider, and all business practitioners to consider, it would be this, right? And again, I'll use an example. If I was the captain of the Indian cricket team, and I happened to find this young, raw cricketing talent, a bowler, let's say, who was from somewhere in the back of beyond. And I decided to take that person into the team and make that person have their debut during a World Cup final. The whole country would look at me and say, I'm an idiot, right? They'd say, what's wrong with you? Why would you take somebody and make them, the first time they are performing, why would you make them perform in such a high pressure environment? We all understand this. And so they would say, the right way to do this is you should have first made them practice with your team in lower pressure tournaments. You should have slowly graduated them upwards, so that by the time they arrived at the World Cup, they had gotten used to the pressure, and then they're able to execute those skills without choking. We all understand this when it comes to sports. But for some reason, we don't seem to follow this principle when it comes to work. We teach people a skill in a training program, and then we somehow expect that they will go back to work and magically apply those new skills in high pressure work situations successfully. And we start to show surprise when they say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to go back to doing things the old way. We say, oh, but learning transfer has not happened. Well, of course it's not happened, because we're trying to make a person use that skill in a high pressure environment. How are we going to try and depressurize the environment so that they feel like they can start to use those skills in ways that are not dangerous to them? We need to create the business equivalent of net practice sessions. We need to create the business equivalent of practice matches, where people have the ability to use skills at work that they have learned in a training program, but not in super high critical situations right off the bat. This is when people will start to have the ability to play with it and start to have the confidence to actually try new things, knowing that if it goes wrong, it's not the end of the world. And I would say if there's one thing that I would say is a best practice to implement learning transfer practices at scale better, I would say try and create these practice opportunities at scale, where it's not just in specific areas, but anytime you are introducing people into work environments of different kinds, have practice environments which are lower pressure, so that when they learn skills, they can apply them in those lower skill environments before you start putting them into higher criticality environments. So I would say that's one thing, if I could ask everybody to start doing more of, that would help. I would say that would be it for me.
Thank you. And a great example of cricket. I think we can get some inspiration from there, from sports in general. The next question that we have from Shruti is, what are the important elements of a successful learning intervention in business impact? And I think business impact is something that's a rising concern of L&D professionals and business leaders in general, that how do you ensure that the L&D programs are in line and aligned with the larger business goals and vision? What would be your insights, Anand and Joyita, on this? On how can organizations ensure that the L&D programs doesn't lose sight of the vision and goals that the business has, and the growth plans of the business, and they are well aligned with that? Any insights on what has worked, what you have seen has worked for organizations? Yeah,
Anand, do you want to?
Sure, I can start off. And Joyita, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well, more from an inside perspective from a business rather than more from a learning consulting perspective. As a business at Wilson Learning, we've often taken care to make the difference between a training program and what we call a human performance improvement program, right? They're two different things. A training program, as we've said, is great for knowledge. It's great as an event. It's great for immediate feedback, but then very often does not result in business impact. So the question then is, what results in business impact? Where I'll start this process is, I'll say, to create maximum business impact, there are multiple elements. The first most important element that I think needs to be taken care of by learning professionals is we need to change conversations internally about what a learning workshop or a learning implementation is. And here's what I mean by this. Very often, as learning professionals, when a request comes to us from business, the request normally will come in the form of, I want you to go find XYZ program, or I want to do XYZ program for my people, right? That's how it comes. XYZ could be sales, it could be negotiation, it could be presentation, communication, whatever it is. But normally, this is how the request comes from business. The temptation is to simply take that request, go out, shop for programs, come back, present programs in front of business and say, here is the cost for all of these programs. Which program do you choose? And then the conversation becomes a cost conversation. Which of these programs is worth the money that you're asking me to spend on it? Why? And therefore, let me pick a program, right? This is the conversation that needs to be changed. The conversation needs to go from what is the cost of a training program to what is how much is it worth it to the business to create XYZ increase in said business metric. That's an entirely different conversation. So, for example, if a sales leader comes to me and says, I want you to find a sales training program, what is the cost of a program? I can tell you right now that any program that I give you is too expensive. No sales training program is worth the price that any vendor will charge. But if I can change that conversation to, why are you doing this program? What is the business metric that you believe doing this program is going to change for you? And if I then find out that the business metric is the revenue that this person's sales teams generates, well, what is the change? Are you looking at increasing your revenue by what? 10%, 15%, 20% this year? How much of that do we believe this program is going to contribute to? And if you're saying the program should contribute to about 5% of that number, how much is a 5% increase in your revenue worth to your business? That's an entirely different question to ask and an entirely different conversation to have with the business. This is a far more stable starting point in terms of where, as learning professionals, we can start to engage with business in ways that keep that impact front and center. Because after this, then you don't get sucked into that conversation of how much does this cost? Is there a discount? That's not it. It's not about the discounts anymore. It's about how much is that increase in revenue worth for you? No matter what the charge of the program is, it's worth a lot more than that. So now let's change the conversation. It's not about what's the price cut I can give you. It's more about what are all the things you are willing to do to make this program worth it for you. So I would say starting there is a great way to begin. And I'm sure there's multiple other elements that Joyita will share as well in terms of her own internal experience with doing this. So Joyita, over to you.
No,
Sure.
thank you for sharing that example, Anand, because I think there's another question by Mint on what measurements of learning impact are most effective to convince the decision makers to invest more in learning. And I think you've, in a way, answered that as well. So,
Yeah.
Joyita, I would love to hear from you as well that what do you think in practice? What have you seen work in terms of designing learning intervention in a way that they have a business impact as well?
Right. And I want to just say that, Anand, the way that you said that that's how the request comes, that's very true. That's how the request comes. But then, yeah, we have found different ways to kind of respond to that. I think one of the things what we feel is that as L&D professionals, let's not, kind of address the business or respond to them only when the need comes. Let's stay with them throughout, right? Let's know the business very well all the time. And the way that you can do it, there are town halls, there are, large setups, conference. So we, in fact, recently did like two big conferences for two large businesses that we have in Moglix. And, we were a part of that, right? We also presented our piece. So being part of that, constantly being part of the business teams and really understanding the challenges, the complexities, what's changing, what's coming up, really gives you those cues that, what is changing and what is the need of the hour, right? Sometimes you can go back to the business and tell them that, hey, okay, so this skill, I think it's a very niche skill, which is rarely available in the market. But if we hire somebody with this specific skill, I think we have a great opportunity that we can develop him, to this level. And that's the way that you're adding value to the business, right? The business really looks up to you as a value partner rather than just a, kind of learning operations person who's just, taking a need and, kind of delivering that, right? So I think that's very important to constantly be with the business, really knowing their challenges, what are the business goals of this year, and really trickling down the L&D goals from there. So I think that is essentially what we do. The other thing I would like to talk about is also a skill gap assessment, which we have in fact started driving this year. So we just do not want to kind of take up interventions which comes as a requirement from different businesses. We do take that if it's of a high priority, but we want to take the other way, right? We want to first, let's say, assess the competencies and the skills, who's proficient, who's expert in a certain skill in different areas, and then kind of pick up, okay, these are the top 3 priorities of this year, right? And this is how I want to kind of take this up. So that is another way that we are following for 2022. And the third way is, of course, knowing the end goal of the business. Let's say if you're addressing a specific problem, really knowing, like Anand said, that what is the end revenue. That's a very important insight, right? And how much L&D's intervention is going to contribute that, right? And then going towards that. So I think these are the 3 things which can really help you business to feel that the L&D team is really adding, the interventions are really adding value.
And if I can just quickly jump onto the back end of that, Drishti, something jumped out when Joyita was speaking, where we often say this, right? Often I think it's important for learning and development professionals to actually stop thinking about learning and development and to start thinking more business. Where if you want to have a credible conversation with business leaders about why they want to do learning and development initiatives, you have to talk like a business leader, not like a learning and development specific expert, right? So what we often say is learning and development is not necessarily always the answer to business problems. So if someone comes to us saying they want a learning initiative, the question is always, if the answer is learning initiatives, what was the question? Business does not want to do learning for fun. Business does not want to do learning because it's cool. Nobody spends money on this stuff just because it's fun to do it, right? Clearly, there is some way in which they are trying to advance the business. What is that way? Is it about revenue? Is it about cost? Is it about profitability? Is it about market penetration? Is it about productivity? Is it about effort? Or is it about some combination of these things? Our ability to have that conversation and to understand how business measures success and what is that success they're trying to create, for which they are saying the answer, or at least part of the answer, is a learning initiative. We need to know what that question was initially. And like Joyita just pointed out, yes, it's good for us to know our instructional design and our programs and things like that. But unless we're able to start from a place of business, it becomes very hard to convince business that we have an eye on the metrics that matter to them. So I would 100% agree. It's that starting point of the conversation that very often decides how productively the conversation is going to move forward.
Rightly said. I think it's important to be on that journey from the very beginning and be more proactive and know what the business requires, and maybe even suggest and give ideas and not just have a reactive approach, right? So thank you, Joyita and Anand, for sharing that. And there are many questions coming in, I know, but we are short on time, and there's this last segment that we really want to get insights of our audience on as well. Before we wrap up the discussion, we have another poll for the audience where we want to ask them, what are the goals, the L&D goals for this year for your organization? And we have 4 options for you as well. So if we can have the code on the screen. Thank you, team. So I would request everyone to go once again on menti.com and use the code 922-93257 and share with us what are your L&D goals for your organization. Linking learning to performance, data-driven learning through upskilling, reskilling, and cross-skilling, focusing on gamifications and simulations, or investing in transferable soft skills and human power. And as we are waiting for our audience to, I think, share, would love to hear from you, Joyita and Anand as well, that what do you think, or what would be your L&D priorities, to be honest?
For me, I think our organization, it would be, the first would be learning available and accessible to everyone in the organization whenever they need it. So just-in-time learning, on-demand learning. The second would be data-driven learning. You know, you have a data all around, like you can just get a lot of insights from there and really, you know, see that what is the need of the hour, right? What does the organization need to kind of create, you know, a business impact? And the third would be definitely the application and impact part, which we spoke a lot during today's conversation. It's about the manager's, you know, intervention and really drive the teams to kind of learn. So I think these are the 3 key goals for us this year.
Thank you for sharing that. And Anand, what about you? What, as you work on, with different organizations, what would be top 3 goals for you from the L&D programs that you plan to implement this year?
Well, as you may have seen from the conversations that we have just had, a constant ongoing goal for me is always that link between the actual learning event and the application and transfer of learning on the job. So the more I can do about that, the more I can help clients and different people.
I can't hear you, Anand. Is it my internet?
No, I think his video has got frozen.
Okay.
Oops.
Okay, and you're back.
Now,
You're back.
now we
I'm
can
sorry,
hear
folks.
you.
I lost
No
power.
problem.
I don't know why the video got frozen, because I do have my modem connected to a UPS, so it should have continued. But yeah, now that I'm back. So I was saying, the thing that I normally work on, and it's a constant thing for me, is that application of learning on the job and trying to create that manager coaching, that business leader involvement as much as possible. The other thing that I have that might also be connected to some of the results that you're seeing here, and it's more a pet project for me, is there's a lot of talk of digitization of learning, gamification of learning, and things like that. But often what happens is a lot of it is dependent on the extent to which participants in organizations are actually present on certain types of digital environments, right? So here's an example of this. We often talk about pushing learning or increasing the consumption of learning through phones. So if people have mobile phones or smartphones, how do you help them consume learning through phones? Now, there's a core requirement for this. Unless I have a phone and I have the habit of using my phone regularly, there's no point in you trying to push learning to me through a phone, right? I need to be present on the platform for the learning through that platform to work for me. So, one of the things that I like to work on with organizations and clients nowadays is to see what is the kind of digital environment that exists within the organization, and what are the already existing work practices and digital footprints that people leave in their in work environment. We're not even talking about outside work because there are privacy issues and things like that you'll have to be careful about there. But your in work environment is a much more controllable work environment where you can have a lot more data driven learning design based on existing footprints and patterns of usage that people have. So being able to try and make a correlation between that and steps that people are taking on gamification, or linking learning to actual digital steps and digital platforms, that's the other thing that I like to focus on more as an individual project. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think some of your thoughts, I think our audience also resonates with that, because as we can see from the results over here, the top priority for our audience would be data-driven learning through upskilling, reskilling, and cross-skilling. And many people are also looking to focus on linking learning to performance. And I think that's something that you also touched upon. All right. Thank you, Anand and Joyita. Before we wrap up, do you want to share anything, or one thing maybe, if you can, both of you can share one key takeaway from you from this session that stood out for you?
For my
Anyone can
part,
go first. Yeah.
for my part, I would say listening to Joyita talk about some of the things that she has been having success with in her organization just drives home to me the point that we made earlier, which is for a learning and development professional to be successful in terms of consistent success in a business environment. Yes, it's good to know your learning and your learning design and your learning content, but I think it's equally important, if not more important, to understand your business, to know more about the business itself and what are some of the core drivers that the business is looking to leverage to create success in its marketplace, and then to be able to understand how do learning solutions play a part in actually hitching your success to those drivers. That's what I think allows you to create more sustainable, tangibly successful measures of learning that you can put in place as strategies. And I know, working with Joyita, that she has had great success with this. There are multiple people, and not everyone does it the same way. You've got to work within the constraints of your environment. But as long as you've got your eye on those business drivers of success, is where I've found that sustainable success comes from. So I would say hearing Joyita has driven that home and reinforced that point for me. So that's been great to hear and very insightful.
Thank you, Anand. Yes, Joyita.
Great. No, absolutely. Well, likewise, it's been great to hear some great insights and examples, especially the sports one I really liked. I would say, again, going back, while we always keep on hearing this on and on, but perhaps I'll repeat it one more time, that how do you kind of have the leaders and the managers accountable to a learning program or intervention or whatever, a journey that we are doing, right? Any learning initiative that we are doing, how do you partner with them so that they have equal ownership and accountability as you have? It's not the L&D team who's driving something, but it's the leader and the manager also driving it with you, right? They are both at the driver's seat with you to ensure that the entire thing is successful, and the learners have learned some skill, and they are really, that upskilling or whatever cross skilling has happened, right? So how do you ensure that? So I think that is one thing which will be very, very important and a key takeaway from this webcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joyita and Anand, for sharing all those insights, use cases, and examples, and some insights from your research as well, Anand. Thank you so much. To share the detailed learning transfer research, someone from Wilson Learning will soon get in touch with the audience and will share with all of you the research that Anand had shared some insights from. And we would also like to thank our partner for this session, Wilson Learning. Wilson Learning helps organizations improve effectiveness of salespeople and sales leaders. Their solutions result in significant returns for clients, including more deals won, higher margin sales, more referrals, more upsells and cross-sells to existing customers, and faster growth in sales revenue. For more information, you can visit their website. I think the link would be shared with you on the chat. Now, in the interest of time, we all would have to wrap up today's session. I know there's a lot to discuss. We might need, multiple more sessions to uncover the other layers of an effective L&D strategy. So we'll soon be back with more sessions. Please provide your feedback in the survey link in the chat section meanwhile, because your input matters. And stay tuned for many more such exciting conversations. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe and take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Drishti. Thank you,
Thank you,
everyone.
Anand and Cheta.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Anand.